welcome back to my own narrative series of The Lands of Ordia, Power of Heaven, which is my own fantasy series that I'll be writing and publishing in the next few years, or hopefully. It'll take a while because it'll be 5 books total, and yeah, because of that, I'm just reading through the first book here so that you guys can know what's going on before the second book is published. And if you'd like to know, then definitely check out my channel and look up the playlist of The Lands of Ordia to see what else has gone on in the story so far. Because last time we read through Chapter 5, which was A Breath of Relief, because Koraven and Jaerel were able to pretty much escape the clutches of the Vol'dun and meet some curious characters, and now they're finally back home. And now that they are back in Avlin, the Gnomish community, it's about a month away before their annual festival, which we'll pretty much learn all about in this chapter here. This chapter 6 called Gnomish Traditions. The next few weeks felt like a life age to Jaerel. Not only was he waiting for the famous annual festival of the Gnomes, but he also kept the gem inside the drawer with great difficulty as it continued to lure him with a strange power. In addition, he kept his eyes out for Sirvan, Tyrden, and especially Kaladel, the roaming wizard who Jaerel dearly wished would come knocking at his door any day now. But the Elf Lord and his trusted warrior did not show up or send word, and the tall wizard did not make any grand or secret appearance, leaving Jaerel to deal with the gem alone once again. He remembered Sirvan's word to keep the gem at Maestr Nukain until they arrived, but each weekend when Jaerel visited Avlin, there was no sight or news of them. 3 weeks had passed now, and the annual festival was only 6 days away. He and Koraven had gone back to their daily lives, trying to avoid the temptations of the upcoming party. They decided to help the farmers and stopped by the local smithy shop, where Alvin Bakelkor was forging new plows and hoes as the Hillabins, Halag's family lineage, traditionally broke their tools in under a year. Each day was kept busy for the two friends, but Jaerel had constant paranoia. Every night he peered out of his window, looking for any shadowy ghost or unsavory character. He even had Alvin install a metal lock to their front door, to which the gnome was very curious, since Jaerel and Koraven hardly had any visitors, save Halag, and at times, Barrison and Callison, a well-known duo named the Cousins of Catastrophe. Things were not going as well as Jaerel had thought, but with some unknown strength and courage, he kept the gem at bay as the festival drew nearer. Rumors that Kaladel had been sighted traveling to Maestr Nukain in a large cart, bypassing the gnomes entirely. Jaerel took up this news with great interest as he visited one of the many taverns stationed across Avlin, the Brass Dragon. The establishment was set on the borders of Avlin, on the smallest hill, overlooking a vast plain stretching to the Chemkor forest, its trees barely in view during the day, and completely invisible by night. "I've seen him," said Old Nukes, a regular visitor to the Brass Dragon, "just a few nights ago, riding by my lands." "He's here early then," remarked the bartender, Brodgar Bagalin, who would hear so much gossip in one day he could never keep up. "Normally he'd just show up a few days before the party." "Suppose he's got something special," guessed Florin Belmar, a well-known cook, and had to pick it up in the city. Who knows what that old man is up to," coughed Nukes. "I'd rather not get up in the business of wizards. Dangerous they are, even those darn magicians in the city, practicing magic and spells. What will that do?" Jaerel glanced over his shoulder at the elderly man's remarks to argue that magic could be used for good, but said nothing. Old Nukes had been in Avlin ever since the new foundation of the village, and absolutely hated the ways of magic, used either for good or ill. He despised the practices of anything that wasn't of the natural order of life. Jaerel had loved being in the woods and fields so much he had earned the respect of the elder in a matter of months. Nukes, despite his old age, ran one of the biggest farms in the Third Hill, growing delightful beetroots, tall stalks of bright golden corn, and rows upon rows of the tallest carrots that any gnome had seen. Indeed, the old gnome had grown respect all the way to the First Hill, where the Mayberries themselves had given quick compliments to him in person, but remarked that his fading white hair made his skin look more wrinkled as every day passed. "But you know," said Timmelvor Falcon, another regular at the bar, "if not for magic, that wizard would not put on such excellent shows, not to mention distractions for the kids." Old Nukes kept quiet at that point. "Learn to accept the changing ways," prodded Brodgar, glancing first at Jaerel and back to the old man, hunched over his third drink of the night. "Maybe magic isn't so bad after all." "Huh, not so bad," laughed Nukes as he drowned his last drink. "We'll see about that." Brodgar made a worried look to Jaerel, but being a half-drunk gnome in the middle of the night, Jaerel did not deem nukes as a threat, either to his magical practices or the disruption of the pub. "Splatter and nonsense," said Florend as he helped Nukes to his wobbling feet. "No worries, fellows. I'll get him to his place." Brodgar nodded as the two gnomes took off for the night. Don't listen to him," said Brodgar to Jaerel, who noticed the half-breed didn't say anything yet and had only finished half his drink. "Besides, he don't mean you. You're on his good side, I'd say." "Which I'm grateful for," Jaerel admitted with a smirk. "Don't worry about me, though. I'll be fine. Just waiting for the festival." "As we all are. Here, finish your drink and the next one's on the house, eh?" Jaerel couldn't argue with that, even if he wasn't a big drinker as most of the gnomes in Avlin were. With a few chats between Brodgar, he polished off both glasses and stumbled home. 3 days later, the annual Festival of the Gnomes was officially announced by Mayor Arbin, and the chatter instantly switched from hill rivalry to expected merry times with friends and family. Many of them were hopeful to see Kaladel, just as Jaerel and his friends were, but dealing with wizardry, as Nukes took it, was dangerous and not to be kept within the boundaries of Avlin, at least not for too long if it was admitted. Yet the thoughts of the darkness had not yet entered the minds of the gnomes, or so Jaerel had added to his hopes, and the constant desire for the gem lessened in his mind. The festival drew near as every day passed, until at last, the day came in with bustling cooks and butchers, chattering vendors and continuing debates between the berry families, as was very much expected, even to Jaerel and Koraven. That night the air was fresh and pure, giving a sweet aroma to all those who entered the massive tent set upon Brelendum. White slanted fabrics with a red-striped design stretched high into the night sky, strapped tightly to one of the enormous trees that stood magnificently above the entire village of Avlin. Its leaves had begun to fall, but there were still bunches of golden leaves near the end of their cycle. The evening sun's glare made the tree come alive, and the tent gleamed spectacularly, able to lure the curious gnomes in, already awaiting the delectable courses to devour, and the various ales to be drunk down in a matter of minutes. A group of odd gnomes, coming from the city, had learned the ways of instruments and music professionally, playing strings and flutes and harps to show off their talents to the village. Upon their glorious show, they were set upon a grand stage standing high above the bustling crowd, where Arbin would soon make his speech. Tables and benches were lined neatly together under the tent, while roaring campfires were lit right outside, where most of the elderly men were tending them with every minute. The calm breeze wafted through the busy village, the sun's last light glowing a warm orange-red shade, and before long evening faded to allow the night to settle in, marking the beginning of the party. Since Jaerel and Koraven were from Trellfarthen, they, along with Halag, had to climb over the next two hills, passing over many vacant homes, their owners most likely already arriving to show off their pleasant dinners, their exuberant outfits, and their outstanding wealth, at least the ones in the first hill. Rounding the top of Trellfarthen, it was a sight that Jaerel never got tired of. The peak of the hill was the highest of all the farthens, so it overlooked the second and first hills in a stunning view, either in sun or moonlight. That night, as Jaerel got to the top with Koraven and Halag, sharing several stories with one another behind him, the hills glowed a magnificent golden-brown shade as the waves of grass tumbled and swirled in every direction. The fences at the top of the second hill were spiking in a shining white color, jutting up and down the small crevices and valleys of Avlin. To Jaerel, Earlfarthen was not so bad as the Ars had usually degraded regarding the people's moods and actions towards outsiders such as himself or Koraven. All the smithies lived in Earlfarthen, being surrounded by 2 sets of hills, which meant much more stone and ore to dig for. Half of their land was dedicated to mining and forging, and as Jaerel, Koraven, and Halag strode through the roads, bits of rubble and gravel could be splattered everywhere, some in chunks and some loosely on the road. 2 families that were very much known for their excellent smithy work were the Chalmans and Brolocks, both of whose houses were empty as Jaerel walked by. Coming upon Arfarthen, Jaerel straightened his back and pulled on his dark green waistcoat, the only fancy sort of clothing he owned. He and his friends arrived at the main gate, which was much more of a silver color with twirling designs all along the edges. The fence was a twisted metal grate stretching down and through the hills, some stretching into the higher houses of the land. The first hill, in the outside gnome's opinion, was the most odd part of Avlin. Most of the houses were actually built outside of the hills, while their storage or extra bedrooms were burrowed underground. If the family was rich enough, the house even had 2 stories and a double door. As expected, the Barry families all had 2-story houses, each a different color to rival the other. Next, as if the Barrys did not do enough to show off their wealth, The eckleberries, to both the maize and golden's surprise, made their own shining patio that gleamed with pride in the night and shone like the sun in the day. From then on, the competition was tight. Once, as Jaerel walked past a busy house with its candle lights still burning bright, its owner from inside exclaimed, "My, oh my! If the thirds have come by, we're late!" It sounded like an elderly woman, and when Jaerel glanced over his shoulder curiously, his guess was correct. A scurrying white-haired woman hurried out of her home, followed by 5 other gnomes, 2 of whom were older parents and the other 3 gnomes, probably in their 20s or 30s, being pushed out of the door, squeezing into their tight, bright clothes on the run. All of them were dressed in fanciful outfits of various colors and shapes, including tall, wide-brimmed hats on the grandmother and her daughter. The father and his 3 sons were well-groomed with their hair slicked back, and a strong sense of perfume seemed to waft with them. Koraven shook his head as the family forcefully pushed their way past the trio. Halig was tempted to trip them so their faces would end up in the mud, but Jaerel slowed them down and once they made their move. Even among the gnomes there was much diversity, and only it was separated by wealth in Avlin. But as Brellendum came into view, the tallest and widest of the hills of Avlin, all of their hearts were sparked with the new coming joy. Hundreds of guests were lined on the side of the hill, each leading to the enormous tent, streaks of red and white with a tall spike at its top, waving a thin dark blue flag with a curved golden A stitched to it. Along the sides of the tents, mostly in the back, were smaller huts with sweaty, busy gnomes all cooking their courses, dousing slabs of meat with seasons and spices, and pouring drinks to be served to everyone inside. All of the important gnomes, being the first hillers and a small group of the seconds, clambered into the back of the tent, which had a brilliant view of the starlit sky along with instant service of the best meals. Naturally, the Mayberry and Goldenberry members were sitting stiffly in their seats, properly maintaining their stature as they ate from their own silver and gold utensils and drank from their own tall goblets. To the left of the berries were the Snowburs, the eldest of all the Avlinians, who were almost all living past their early hundreds. Hunched over their small portions, they ate slowly, but jabbered amongst themselves. To the right of the Mayberry and Goldenberry families was the Eckleberries and Elberries, who were sitting with a rather solemn expression as they dug into their meals gradually. Every now and then they would turn around as if someone had shouted their names or had heard insults, but went back to their steaming food. They knew the whispers about them were hushed when they were around. The rivalry this year between the higher society was much quieter this year, of which Jaerel was very glad. He did not want to come home from such a strange journey just to hear the constant squabbles of the berries. The elves made sure their mistakes were remembered, snarled Dawn Mayberry, glancing at her foes, as she usually put it. A rather nasty bunch, agreed her cousin, Elbana Abanath. You would think to double-check fruit every week. Their minds are growing slower. And not just the elves are embarrassing, but those sneaky Eccles, added Thalia Brilgard, another cousin to Donla. Their kids are becoming spies, and soon enough they continue their criminal ways, thieves. Wouldn't be surprised if they ended up in the city, Many of the maids snickered and bobbed their heads in agreement. Some of them turned their heads to the Goldens, who were all occupied with their plate full of meats and vegetables. Just don't look at 'em, mumbled Jarden Goldenberry, cutting into a savory steak. They're so full of themselves. And conceited, put in Pelamus Shalcaro. If they didn't have half their family in the council, they wouldn't be where they are now. At least Arbin isn't persuaded to one side, said Chelia Velkas. Once Arbin is out of his term, I think Avlin will be in awful terms due to those nasty maize. Just as the maize had nodded in agreement, the Goldens had done the same. The rest of the seconds and all the thirds placed their seats behind the first, but with little to no complaining. Some of them, more of the rowdy and youthful bunches, sat around fires at the edges of the hill, while some stayed in the fields directly below the hill, striking out conversations with their closest friends, some telling stories of past times, while others pricked up their ears in awe-filled curiosity. Not long after most of the gnomes had taken their seats, huge portions of food were being tossed about, and some had already finished their first course, before the line was done. Barrels and kegs of beer, ale, and at times liquor were opened. Mugs were filled to the brim. The joyous laughter and the chatter of fellowship filled the air, making Jaerel feel the most comfortable and content he had felt since his return, besides his visit to Call of Wavlin, that is. As Jaerel came through along the bottom edges of Brellendum, being separated from his friends sometime in the early night, Koraven had snuck up behind him as Halig distracted him by tempting him with a local beer. From behind, Koraven poured a massive bucket of cold water over him, drenching him from head to toe. The crowd around them roared in laughter as Jaerel ran to catch Koraven for payback, snagging his shirt as he tried to duck through the gnomes, but they, being shorter, could not help him. Dragging his friend over to a larger bucket of ice-cold water filled with fresh apples, Jaerel tripped him into it, making a big splash, some of it even hitting 2 tables past. "You'd better watch it now," shouted Old Nukes, sitting near the half-empty bucket with his pants currently soaked, "or I'll drag both of you to the pond and have you all frozen up." "As if you could even lift us, old man," Koraven joked, pulling himself from the water, an apple in hand. "Is that a challenge, I hear?" yelled someone from the side. Old Nukes gave Koraven a long stare until he broke into a smirk and patted him on the back. "Nah, we need these fellows for a bit longer," he said. Jaerel laughed along with his friends as they trudged up the hill for their first bites to eat, eager for familiar and new tastes, especially for Koraven, who was already licking his lips and rubbing his hands. Their boots squished as they trudged upward, their once fancy outfits now drenched and ruined for the night, but the appearance was hardly of any importance for either Jaerel or Koraven. As the official second course of meals began to cycle with a rather delightful smell, Jaerel noticed his parents had finally arrived with their best outfits on, being welcomed by many of the older gnomes with hugs and handshakes. The first Hillers mostly ignored them, or gave them nasty glares and expressions, but the rest were excited to see them. Most cities and towns throughout Ordia had never really welcomed or enjoyed the presence of different races in their midst, which made Avlin so special. Anyone could join their town, all except the servants of evil, that is. To Benin and Sionin, they felt most pleased to be part of this people, too, as they brought in food from the city, to which many of the gnomish mothers gasped with excitement, preparing them quickly and passing them out just as fast. The small band of musicians began to play their tunes, and large areas of the side tents were cleared out for dancing to commence at once. Many of them had learned to dance quite well, while others, to the amusement of everyone else, stumbled around messily, but still tried their best. Eventually, after a quick bite to eat with Benin and Sionin, Jaerel made his way over to Koraven, who was near a small fire with a mix of youthful and elderly gnomes, poking at the flames with long sticks and gazing high to the stars above. 2 of the gnomes had snuck a large barrel of beer over to where they were, passing out mugs to each and every one of them, even if they didn't look to see who it was. Several crafty younger kids tried to snag a cup of the beer, and a few of them were successful, only to spit it out in disgust. The 2 rascals who had snuck the barrel in were known as the Cousins of Catastrophe, and it fit them well. Callison, the young daughter of a very calm pair of parents, could always be seen running barefoot through the dirt fields and forests, climbing trees and wandering through trails. Her hair was always tangled, and sometimes one could not tell if there was mud lodged in, or if it was a great messy knot. With all the messiness ensured, she provided joy in the hearts of the younglings, sparking their own sense of adventure. She took them off into the forest with the help of Barrison, the other mischievous cousin. He came from a much more wild family, which came as no surprise to the community once Barrison had stuck with Callison most of his days. He took to forming, building, and sharpening wood and stone, creating his own makeshift swords, axes, walking sticks, and tools for everyone around him. As entertaining and creative as he was, the children found his secret stash of wooden replicas of swords. They began to fight one another, receiving and dealing with many bumps and bruises. The parents, of course, were not happy to begin with, but had to deal with it as time went on. If these cousins could provide and keep a joyous bunch of children in check, the adult and older people would be content. "Cheers to a good life," Barrison shouted, raising his mug of foaming beer. "Cheers," echoed the surrounding gnomes, half drunk at the time. Clanking their mugs together, they drank in unison, followed by laughter. "Let's get a huge fire going, eh?" Callison suggested loudly, as she was quite drunk by that time. Flames that reach the heavens, and we can all have a cookout." "We just ate, Callie," Barrison told her, sitting her down. "What cookout?" "Hey," Callison said, pointing her finger at no one in particular. "Gnomes are known for food, right? Let's just do it. We're known for our delicious recipes, too." "And being hot-tempered, too," said Galen, an elderly man. "Right, Halef?" "Oi, shut your muddy mouth," Halef said, who sat across the fire. "Let's not be so divided, eh?" Callison came between the two. "Instead, let us all sing our favorite song now." Koraven smiled ear to ear while the rest of the gnomes cleared their throats, and others chugged the rest of their beers. All in unison, though the song was quite short, they bellowed their beloved drinking anthem. "Hey, oh, sing high and low, to warm my heart and fill my soul, and let me have my adventure so, the wind may pass and the rain may go, the ice will melt into the snow, the leaves of autumn fall and blow. and the rich green grass thickly grows, but ever will my heart of gnome return to Avlin, this my home. There was a loud cheer and playful shoves, lifting half-full and empty mugs to the sky. Truly, this was a moment to cherish for all. Unfortunately for Callison, though, there was no giant campfire, but the one that they had right in front of them was good enough for the rest. Koraven sat beside Jaerel, wobbling back and forth with a mug of ale tightly in his grasp, every now and then making small talk with the gnomes to his right. Jaerel gazed dreamily into the hazy wildlife beyond, making out the black boundaries of the chemical forest with its mysterious habits. But as he continued to glance over it and back to the tops of Farthen, he could see something move. A darkened cart being pulled by a pair of hefty horses, with a large man sitting at the front, reins in hand. Jaerel picked up his mug in confusion as his eyes darted from it to the sudden figure in the distance, about to blame this incident on the beer, but as it came closer, the more detail Jaerel could pick out, and in a minute his heart was pounding with an excited nerve. The silhouette was none other than his long friend and well-known wizard, Caladel. He had his usual apparel on, a billowing gray cloak with the hood folded messily on his back. He wore a pointed hat, too, with a lengthy, circular brim at the base. A great white beard flowed down the wizard's chest, and his hair was the same color, streaming down his back. He had a staff in the shape of an intertwining branch with a deep red jewel resting atop, but the staff was resting to his side for now. As always, Caladel arrived at the Gnomish community with a bright smile, greeting everyone, especially the children who loved his company, mostly for the peculiar and magnificent magic he would perform. Glancing behind the wizard, Jaerel could see two more figures rise from the back of the cart. To his shocking surprise, one of them was Sirven in his high elven form, who had a slightly irritated expression at first, but upon being greeted by the numerous children whose mouths were gaping open in awe, he loosened up. The second figure Jaerel did not know. She was much smaller than Sirven, slender and short, giving a pleasant appearance, though. She was dressed in a loose, leaf-like skirt with an emerald glimmer and golden embroidery flashing across the sides. Bright yellow hair was tucked neatly behind her head in a twisting braid, and her eyes were deep green, calm in compassion. Her long pointed ears intrigued almost everyone around her. When she knelt down to the gnomes, mostly to the little children, Jaerel could notice small sparks fly from her fingers. The spark would then flutter and sputter through the air, disappearing seconds later with no trace. The children laughed and danced, wanting her to do it again and again, which she happily agreed to, feeling appreciated for her gift. In addition to her exciting spells, she took small twigs and branches, and like the tiny lights she conjured, she set a new sparkling light at the tip of each wooden stick, giving them to the wildly ecstatic children. Jaerel had to find out who this was, if she was some sort of young elven princess or a mysterious mystical figure. Knowing the elves and their strictness, he knew their people would never allow one so young to be wandering with strangers, especially with a wizard. "Come here, my lad," Caladel shouted to Jaerel, dismounting the cart with open arms. Jaerel ran up to him, embracing the wizard tightly with a huge grin across his face, which was burrowed into a thick bundle of Caladel's white beard. "I'm so glad to see you again," Jaerel said, the happiest he'd been all night. "For a while I didn't think you would come." "Well, I've been gone for longer than I had hoped," the wizard chuckled as Koraven ran up to hug him as well. "But I will always come back, sooner or later." "Have you any news of the outside?" Jaerel asked, almost shouting. "I mean, apart from Zephithia, that is. I myself have just returned from Vase with Koraven, so I've almost reached central Salmoria by now." My, you're bound to travel the world," Caladel smirked. "And so I've heard that you were in Vase, and with some help." But Caladel did not glance over to Koraven, who had been occupied with a couple of younger gnomes trying to sneak in a shot of liquor. I never would have guessed the gem to be hidden there. Jaerel almost stumbled back in shock. He's told you?" he asked, looking briefly at Sirven, who was nervously and begrudgingly talking with a group of the younger gnomes. "Of course, Jaerel. Don't be a fool. I am a wizard, appointed by the Tanalan themselves, and from the Alumnar even, to keep Ordia safe, but most of all, to find the stones of Imlaken. Sirven had met me in Mulianty, where he had found the sweet innocent fairy, who has captivated my crowd for the night." "She's a fairy?" Jarel's mouth was wide open, just as shocked as the children who had witnessed such beautiful magic before their eyes. "Yes, Ileana is part of a lonely race, and she is far from home. I brought her here, hoping this was as close to her people as possible. But you may ask her questions when the time is right." The half-breed looked to the side of the cart, where the girl was still busy distracting the kids. A fairy. Very rare to be in Ordia nowadays. Joining a rather random company at such a strange time struck Jaerel with a greater shock than when he had seen the wizard rolling over the hill. Nevertheless, the strong desire for adventure suddenly came over him, and for the first time in the night, his thoughts swayed positively to the gem. "Be careful of it," Kaladel warned him, as if he could read Jarel's mind. "It may have been crafted by the forces of good, but they may become poisoned because of the evil that still spreads throughout our lands. That stain of vile corruption that was left behind lives inside those gems, wanting to gather to the black crystal, along with its remnants." "The black crystal," repeated Jaerel with a murmur. "I'd never heard of it until Sirven informed me." "Which is better for you. It is something that none of us should touch or even come close to. Even pressing on the shards or simply gazing into it, evil has the upper hand." "What about a crystal?" came a familiar voice. Jaerel turned to see Barrison, one of the cousins of Catastrophe, his hands dripping with beer and a wide smile greeting both the half-breed and the wizard. "Nothing, my friend," Kaladel said, patting him on the back as Barrison sat beside him. The wizard's size almost twice the amount of the gnomes. Suddenly, Jaerel could see a hand resting on Kaladel's shoulder. Glancing back, he could see Sirven standing firmly in place with a stern expression. "We cannot linger here for long," Sirven told him in a serious tone. "The longer we are in the open, the more vulnerable we may become." "Relax now, my lord," Kaladel told him with a grin. "It will only be for a night. I am certain that the Dark Lord cannot possibly come here tonight of all places and times." Sirven released a deep sigh. "Would you like some beer?" Koraven asked Sirven timidly, lifting up a full mug and spilling its contents slightly to the side. Sirven did not respond or make any movements at first, and Jaerel wondered if he was frozen in time. But when he reached over to grasp the mug, he and Koraven felt very much relieved. Normally, any being outside the elves rarely saw them drink any sort of alcohol, but as Sirven sided with Kaladel most times, he, at seldom times, took to relaxing with him. If there was any race in Ordia to share a sigh of relief with, it was the gnomes. The night was still young as the moon drifted high above them, glittering in the early stars, twinkling at everyone in sight with great joy. Truly, this was the night everyone had been waiting for. Suddenly, a loud trumpet sounded from the top of Brelendum, piercing the air and flowing through the hills. It was now time for the annual speech given at every festival by the mayor, whether it was to be dreaded or celebrated. Arbin, though he gave no surname to everyone, was elected mayor for almost 5 years now, being one with all the people, including the Third Hillers, who loved him dearly. He was a stout gnome, one of the shorter ones, with curly white hair on a balding head and huge rounded ears. Most of the time he was dressed in a bright blue waistcoat and light brown trousers, and as Jaerel made his way up the hill with Kaladel, Koraven, and Halag beside him, he could see a similar outfit strapped neatly to him. He was standing now on the stage where the musicians hurried away, collecting their coins from the wealthy First Hillers, who tossed them into a small bucket for appreciation on the wooden floors. There were loud shouts of, "Speech! Let's hear it! Speech!" Arbin clambered to the stage with a large tankard in hand as he waved his hands back and forth to quiet the crowd. Jaerel and Koraven were already smiling with anticipation, and Kaladel gave a curious glance to the mayor, wondering what words of advice and appreciation he would give. "My dear and fellow comrades and friends," Arbin shouted with his arms stretched wide, "what a night to be alive!" The people before him bellowed back in unison with an eruption. "Cheers! Hey!" "What a grand village this is," the mayor continued, spanning the crowded benches and tables, even back to where Jaerel was standing. "And what amazing folks you are." Many of the men lifted their half-drunken beers and ales in agreement. "Yes, yes, we are very blessed to be here, by the will of Alu, and by the prayers of Mother Lania. Long may they look upon us and be proud." A long collection of ayes and blessings came from the crowd, but quickly died down. "Though we are shortened in height, our spirits are lifted high, our motives pure, and our character to be praised by many. Now, I am not bragging about our species by any means, but it is well known that we are the happiest, most content beings in Zaphithia, nay, in Ordia itself." Most of the crowd gave a thunderous round of applause. "I would dare say that Lani herself would be pleased with us tonight. Yet even with such happiness that I love and adore, we would not be here if not for those who gave their lives and blood to defend our original home. Avlin, in the cursed, desolate land of Tarash, may it ever be haunted and left alone." Faces were downcast after he said this, their eyes lowering sadly. "May the wretched Dark Lords suffer in its shadows as we remember their lives, the ones that matter and make this world worth living. Even though our mourning and sadness, we celebrate life. If we do not live our lives to the fullest, then they died for nothing. "We are strong," shouted Old Nukes, followed by a chorus of "Ayes" from others. "Indeed we are," agreed Arbin, lifting his tankard. "And we must also remember those who gave us this glorious land, those who have let us live once again in our peaceful community. Therefore, I invite those who are not of Gnomish blood." There was a great murmur amongst the entirety of the Gnomish crowd, looking side to side to find the obvious figures who were out of place. Jaerel felt like hiding behind Kaladel or slipping away at a moment's notice, but almost all eyes were on him, the wizard, and Koraven. Jaerel glanced to either side of him and Kaladel, but could not find Sirven. To the left, he could see his parents, Benin and Sealnan, being nudged ahead to the stage, and likewise, he was suddenly bumped by Kaladel to approach the mayor as well. Shifting through the stairs of the gnomes, he finally made his way to the stage where Sealnan had wrapped her arm around his shoulder. Koraven stood proudly beside him, and next to him was Kaladel. Benin positioned himself next to his wife with his hands folded neatly together, glancing at Arbin to continue his speech. Jaerel suddenly thought of the ferret again, and he looked for her quickly among the edges of the tent, and found her where he had originally been standing. Perhaps, since this was her first visit to Avlin, she felt out of place and let those who had been there before let them have their moment. "It is with great honor to welcome kinds not of our own into our midst," Arbin declared, motioning to the guests, where there was scattered applause among the first hillers, but shouts and loud clapping from the rest. "Without the help of the great King Intisham, we would not be here today. Though our ways may seem odd and quite irregular to those who have hailed from the king's city, we may yet be friends and forevermore. So I must say this, may our kin ever be friends, and let our bonds of fellowship and truth always be intact until the end of ages. Together we shall make any form of darkness disappear to transform into beacons of light." A huge amount of applause, shouts, and hoots of strong encouragement sounded through the tent and through the very hills of Avlin. The clanking of mugs and tankards followed for another minute or so as Arbin beckoned Jaerel and the rest to join the party again. As Jaerel strode down the stage to join his parents at the edge of the tent, he wondered how Arbin had learned to speak so elegantly, or at least so properly for a gnome. Not once did his voice stutter or shift to a country-infused accent so much like everyone else. But Arbin's personal business and life were his own, and he shook the thought out of his mind. If he was lucky, Jaerel could maybe question him about it, but that would be in the far future. The night shifted to a flurry of dancing again as the band started the second half of their set, a much more lively list of tunes that Jaerel and Koraven enjoyed very much. Kaladel had even joined the gnomes as he carefully tapped his feet and bent his knees with great caution, all the while savoring each moment. An enormous smile spread from cheek to cheek on the wizard for almost half an hour until he began to sweat, and, joining Jaerel and Koraven, made his way to the same campfire that they had been circled around earlier. But once they had arrived, Kaladel was taken aside by Sirven once again, his regular serious expression more daunting than usual. Jaerel turned around to see Barristan totally passed out on the ground beside Callison, who was staring into the dancing flames, reaching inches from her face at times. After a few rounds of jokes and more shared adventures between Koraven and Callison, the talk turned to a rather serious turn. "You know, Jaerel," Callison began with a softer tone as she poked the fire with a long twisted branch, "there have been some weird things around here. Sets everyone on edge." "What sort of things?" Jaerel asked, worried. His thoughts went straight to the Voldoon, their menacing black figures hovering over helpless gnomes, quivering in fear. "Everything just seems off, if you understand my saying. The vibes of Avlin this year has grown. Well, how do I say it? Wearisome? It's like a weight is holding down every one of us in town, but we can't find the source." And some, like me, butted in Halig, who had suddenly made his appearance behind Callison, say the darkness is returning. It's like everything is growing dim, sort of like drifting into shadows, slipping into the past of that horrible tragedy. To be honest, Barris and Cal and I are beginning to have a waver in the faith that any good will come about us. "You three?" Jaerel was astonished. But everyone is so full of optimism. This is such a happy place. It's home. Is tonight a night of fake emotion, then?" No, not at all," stammered Callison, giving Jaerel a brief glance. "This celebration is more of a rewinding sort of feel, relaxing the night away from them spooky nights." "Spooky nights?" repeated Jaerel. "Aye, yeah," Halig said with a long sigh. "Most of us don't want to admit it, but we think our town, especially in Trell, is being haunted." "Haunted?" Koraven almost shouted, startling Barristan back to his tipsy vision. "Haunted by what exactly?" And he gave Jaerel a worrisome expression. We're not sure, Callison answered, her gaze still focused on the fire. There have been sightings of weird-looking folks at night, surrounding the fields, but they never really enter. Suppose they're scared of us or something. Both Jaerel and Koraven remained silent. What we're trying to say, Halig said with a gloomy voice, is that if the darkness really does reach Avlin again, it might be the doom of our kind. A solemn silence was shared among their friends. The crashing and booms of the drunk gnomes above became numb to Jaerel, his mind slipping away from reality. If Zarlan was truly this powerful, and if he could create a second, much better army to cover all of Ordia, as most people in Ordia believed, no celebration would ever again be held in this beautiful, quaint town. The doom of all free folk was close ahead, and it hit Jaerel straight to his face. Death was near, though his was just the beginning of a long story, and somehow he knew in his heart that this was to be the end of the age. What we're also saying, Halig said, pausing for a moment, is that we're on your side through all this, along with the people of Avlin. There may be dark days ahead of us, but with a strong magi like you on our side, we have a better chance. Except maybe the Mayberries, spat Callison. Jaerel gave an efforted laugh. What is it? Halig asked as he studied Jarrell's growing, concerned face. If there was some sort of fight coming to Avlin, Jaerel said, stopping for a moment, you must be the ones to defend it. That's right, Callison shouted, patting her hand on Jarrell's shoulder, startling him. If you need a trio of trustworthy, rough-riding, stubborn fighters, join us right up. Barrison, I'm sure, would happily agree to it. Barrison had already passed out once again on the slopes of a slightly rocky mount. We're bound in friendship, Jaerel, Halig reminded him with a warm smile. Ever since you and Koraven came in and accepted us, we will always look to you for support, and most of all, for your leadership. Thank you, all of you, Jaerel said, even glancing at Barrison. Stay around Avlin. Keep a special eye for anything peculiar. I would never in my wildest dreams ever have this town assaulted or, at its worst, destroyed. I wouldn't want to come back to its ruin. Oh, whatever, grumbled Halig. The only bodies to be put in the ground are the Dark Lord himself and his hordes of horrible orcs. While Jaerel was comforted with his friends, Kaladel had shifted over to Benin and Sielnin, who were both weary of dancing and resting at a messy table with napkins and silverware littered in every empty space. The food, however, was completely gone, and with it the full stomachs of almost all the first hellers, the presently exiting seconds, and almost all the drunk thirds. Kaladel had spent his time with Ileana among the prancing gnomes until she too was at her limits. She wandered off to the hills then to take in the night sky and breathe in the fresh air before anything too serious was about to occur. Kaladel, gasped Benin as the wizard slowly bent down on the bench. It's an honor and a blessing to have you here again. Must you be leaving so soon? Unfortunately, yes, said Kaladel in a gruff voice. I can at least enjoy the comforts of these people before the days turn dark. I fear you may have already been told of the situation. Both Benin and Sielnin's faces were downcast at the reminder of Jaerel's tale. They looked to the wizard, hoping that somehow Jaerel was not forced to go on such a perilous journey. To their dismay, they were wrong. I wish I could assure Jaerel's safety before this is all over, the wizard continued his grim message. But this darkness has brooded in the shadows of Ordia for too many years. So many that we have failed to see it, or make mention of it. So it is true, said Benin, almost in a whisper. We had thought this darkness was gone, but many rumors claimed it was back. We couldn't believe it, Sielnin admitted. We didn't want to, of course. And so you kept it a secret from Jaerel? Kaladel scolded them. That may have been a mistake on your part, and I wish you would not have kept such a detrimental fact hidden. How are we to be sure? Benin asked in a panic. There were many signs, Ben, but you have sat too comfortably in your guild. I fear with the lack of knowledge about the enemy, Jaerel will have a harder time experiencing his time. His time, Sielnin repeated. The Alumnar seems to have chosen him for the task of attempting redemption to Ordia. Sirvin has claimed it so, and I shall follow his proclamation. I suggest you do the same, despite the sadness that may come. Benin and Sielnin fell silent, their hearts heavy and their mouths unmoving. Whatever words of comfort now were utterly banished. I am dearly sorry, Kaladel continued, resting his hand on Benin's shaking shoulder. But I will protect your son the best that I may. Thank you, Kaladel, muttered Benin in between forced breaths. We know you will. As their talk settled down to more local news to distract the sorrowful parents, the crowd of the main tent began to file out until the cleaners and organizers of the event were sweeping the area. Callison, Barrison, and Halig decided to leave as Barrison's arms were strewn across Callison and Halig's shoulders, groaning in a very drunk moan. Koraven had quickly taken another mug of beer before he too set out for his and Jaerel's home, promising him that he would make it back safely. After all, most of the gnomes by now were already drunk and caused no sense of violence. Jaerel had stayed at the base of Avlin's enormous hill, where he surprisingly found Koraven standing alone, his eyes gazing at the stars, while the gentle breeze flowed through his silver-glittering garments. His arms were crossed, and Jaerel could hear his steady breathing. He came up silently to the Elf Lord, not wanting to disturb him, but Koraven spoke slowly to him. "You have chosen your fate, then," he said in a low voice, his eyes still closed. "Not quite," Jaerel admitted. "I know I'm not strong enough to do this on my own. I have almost no knowledge of these stones of Imlaken that Kaladel keeps mentioning, and I'm not a very strong Magi either." "But you are not alone." Koraven finally opened his eyes, but did not look at Jaerel. "We are all here for you, to protect you from harm and from this evil that hunts all sacred light. Though the devils and demons are brought abroad in this world, there are those who fight against them and put them in their place." "Like you and Kaladel, then?" "Exactly like us," Koraven gave a quick smirk. "But not only do strong warriors and leaders of power hold the evil at bay, even the smallest beacon of light can drive the darkness away, at least for a while. But that is an encouraging thought, I believe, for though we are few spread across this earth, together we are strong in spirit." "Will there be some sort of company now?" Jaerel asked, his mind drifting to Dyrden and the strange yet powerful elf Galindia, and also to the fairy Ileana. "I suppose if we are strong together spiritually, it would definitely help to be mighty in a more physical form too." "Yes, there will be a small group," the elf said sternly. "It will depend on you when we depart, though. Tomorrow there will be a meeting in Golf Avlin to discuss our future paths and destinations, so I suggest you get some rest. Many difficult decisions may rest in your hands." The Elf Lord walked briskly away as Jaerel stood in place, not sure what to think or do. This was not the expected talk he thought he would have, being so short and abruptly halted. But as an elf of great stature and importance, Koraven had little time to explain himself most times. Jaerel lifted his eyes up to the stars just as the elf had done, wondering if some sort of connection between the twinkling lights and the distant Elf Lord existed. Perhaps if he trained long and hard enough, he would develop a better sense with not only the lands around him, but the air and wind itself. With a new goal in mind, aside from dealing with the gem and its decision, he began to set off home, his mind dazzled, but still very much glad to be at home. And that is the end of Chapter 6. So, Chapter 6, Gnomish Traditions. Yeah, so this is obviously a very light-hearted chapter, as you guys have probably noticed. A big party of the gnomes and whatnot. And as always, too, there's always, like, mentions of these, dark figures that are, stalking around Avlin and whatnot. So even among, like, all these good times and parties and, traditions, the gnomes kind of, like, pick up around them, too, that something's kind of off. So I kind of wanted to include that there's always, like, a sense of paranoia when it comes to these Vol'dun phantoms of the darkness, pretty much. The Vol'dun are supposed to, like, emit this sense of, like, fear, paranoia, all the negative emotions one can have, even from afar. And it definitely happens because, like, the Avlinians, or the gnomes, they're very, I wouldn't say, like, protective of their lands, but they know their lands very well. So word gets around when these weird phantoms start popping up. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this little, like, party scene before, things start taking a new direction, pretty much. A more adventure-filled direction, I would say. But yeah, these last couple chapters were kind of that breath of relief, like I said before the series actually starts taking a much more serious direction. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that little thing. So, and let me know if you guys enjoyed, like, the layout of the gnomes' land. If you didn't catch it, all the hills, there's 3 sets of hills, and they're all called farthings. And so there's, like, the third hill, is on the outside of the land, and then yeah, pretty much, like, the whole layout of Avlin is a bunch of hills and fields, pretty much. Like the third hill is on the opposite, or not the opposite, the furthest side of Avlin, and then it slopes down, like I said, to a field, and then the second hill, then another field, and then obviously until the third final hill, which there's actually four if you count Brellendum, because that's like the tall, big hill that they always put their celebration. So I thought that was pretty cool. And eventually, one of these days, I will be making a map of Avlin, because I think that would be very cool. It'd be really fun to do, I think. So, yeah, let me know if I should do that, because it's been very fun creating maps. I just love that as like a pastime. It's a strange thing, but it's just kind of what I do. But yeah, I think after all that rambling and reading and narrating and all that stuff out of the way, just be sure to stay tuned for another episode, along with all the other personal projects that I do, including exploring Arda, like I've been doing, and also some Star Wars Battlefront stuff. So you'll see it pop up on my channel. So definitely check my whole channel out as a whole. See what playlists I have for you guys. I would definitely appreciate it if you subscribed and followed and all that good stuff. But yeah, make sure to do all that. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. And as always, thank you for listening.